Hello, and welcome. Welcome to the Why We Can't Wait, the Future Blacks in America Conference. I hope you had a good trip, and believe me, I am happy to greet all of you. This conference has been a long time coming, and it represents a lot of work on the parts of a lot of students and the parts of administrators. But the best thing is that it's finally here. The future is here. It is my hope that participants in this conference will use the opportunity to debate and discuss the issues presented throughout this weekend with both presenters and other participants, and that everyone involved will leave a little more informed, a little more excited, and with many more friends. The future of our race has begun. At this point, I'd like to turn the microphone over to a person who has been instrumental in the planning of this conference, planning and execution. A very important person, a very special person, the president of our university, Mr. Derek Bach.
Welcome on my part as well to this conference on the future of blacks in America. It is an honor and a privilege to be able to host a meeting that is devoted to such an important topic, and I hope that it exceeds your expectations. This is a conference, I think, in the finest tradition of blacks in this country, a tradition in which the most fortunate and the best educated feel a special responsibility not only for their future, but for the future of the entire black community. You see that spirit here at Harvard in the efforts of upperclassmen to help black freshmen get adjusted, get used to their studies in the university. And you see it in the very large proportion of black students at Harvard who are working with underprivileged children in housing projects around the Boston area and in many other community service activities. And I'm sure those patterns are evident at other IB campuses as well. We all know that it is fashionable today, it is all too common today to read nothing but gloomy statistics in the newspaper about the situation of blacks in America. But let me simply report one hopeful sign, a sign that has not been publicized much in the newspapers. Indeed, you read much information to the contrary, but it is a fact, whatever you may have read, that in the last 3 years there has been a substantial, dramatic upsurge of black students entering colleges across this country, 4-year colleges as well as 2-year colleges, a 16% increase in 1986, a 14% increase on top of that in 1987. We don't know what will happen for next year, but we do see 11% increase on top of the first two in the number of blacks who are taking the college boards, and that will probably translate into increased admissions for the third consecutive year next fall. Those are increases that should lead to larger numbers of graduating black seniors. It is a fact that the numbers of black students graduating from 4-year colleges in this country has been essentially unchanged since the late 60s. This is the first time I think we have a real opportunity through these recent increases to substantially increase that number in the future. And that will mean, of course, larger numbers of black students in law schools, business schools, medical schools, larger numbers of black leaders entering the society. If I could simply put in a brief plug as an educator, I just hope that those increases do lead eventually to larger numbers of black BAs going into teaching as well. By the year 2000, the proportion of minority students in our public schools will exceed 40% in this country. The proportion of blacks who are preparing to be school teachers has been dropping steadily and is now significantly below 10%. That is a gap we need to try to close for the benefit of children in our public schools in the next generation. In higher education, as you know, the number of blacks earning PhDs has fallen by over 5%, 27% for black men. And try as we might, and whatever we can do in the short run, there will never be substantially more black faculty on the nation's campuses without more blacks going to graduate school. So I'm particularly glad that this conference is going to include a session where students will discuss graduate school as an option for graduating black seniors, because there are a lot of white middle-aged experts who've written on the problem of increasing the recruitment of black PhDs, but surely it's only students like the ones attending this conference who can really tell us what it is that motivates and deters you and your classmates from seeking a career in academic life. But most of all, I hope that all of you will rededicate yourselves to the best traditions of your community by working for the welfare of all black Americans. For the welfare of less fortunate blacks does seem more precarious today than at any time in the last 30 years. There clearly will never be real progress in the black community without the active participation of leaders like you will become, and there can be no true progress in America without progress in the black community. So all of us have a stake in the success of the subjects that you will be discussing in the next few days. To explore these themes, we're very fortunate tonight to have one of the most able, most successful, most influential black leaders in America. Our initial opening speaker, as you know, is a member of Congress, leader of the Democratic caucus in the United States House of Representatives, who really symbolizes through his life and works how one can achieve personal fulfillment in a socially responsible way. He is another in a long line of black ministers who have assumed positions of leadership in this country. His values, his social concerns emerge very clearly from his work as chairman of the Budget Committee in the House and from a legislative record filled with concern for the desperate situation of blacks in Africa. And so it is a special pleasure to introduce one of the most influential and respected legislators in this country, Bill Gray of the 2nd Congressional District of Pennsylvania. Thank you, and we're very grateful for your taking time to be with us.
Let me, first of all, say how glad I am to be here and to join all of you on this occasion when you bring together the students of not only this outstanding and historic institution of higher learning, but others from this area to look at the future of black America and center that question around the question that was, or the statement that was made some years ago by a Moses, not simply for black people, but for all people, why we can't wait. To the distinguished president, Dr. Bach, to all of the faculty and administrators here at Harvard, and to all of my good friends that I see out there from electoral politics as well as from the ministry. For those of you who may not know it, I am a practicing Baptist preacher. I am a politician as a second job. My number one job is the pastor of the Bright Hope Baptist Church. Being a member of Congress is sort of the second job that I have. I am delighted to be here and to join you as you begin this conference. First, a word of apology. Apology that unfortunately I will have to cut my presentation and the question and answer period simply because tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, as chairman of the Democratic caucus of the House of Representatives, I must take 150 members of that Democratic caucus to West Virginia for a 3-day retreat to determine what the legislative agenda of the 101st Congress for the House of Representatives will be. And when we accepted the engagement to come and share with you, we were so anxious to come to Boston that we forgot about that other commitment. So therefore, I will not have the length that a Baptist preacher normally has. Somebody can say amen if they want to. And therefore, you will not be here as I had originally planned until at least 10 o'clock this evening. I think it is extremely important that you come together tonight and over the next few days to look at the future of Black America. Why? Because we are about to enter a new political era. A new administration has come to power in the nation's capital. At the same time, we are about to enter the last decade of this century and preparing to move into the next century. It is an important topic to examine simply because of the various facts and figures that are espoused every day with regard to the well-being and the pulse of Black America. Is Black America in good shape, or is Black America in bad shape? Is Black America growing stronger, or is Black America growing weaker, or perhaps just stagnant? Those questions must be looked at, especially in light of the fact that increasingly as one turns on the television, we see highly visible blacks. And thus one can assume sometime, based upon looking at blacks speaking on a variety of issues on national television, that blacks are doing quite well and that the problems are behind us. And thus all we have to do is simply push enough blacks through those doorways of opportunity that are wide open and unencumbered. They will move forward, and thus the black community, in a very relative short period of time, will adopt in many ways the same socioeconomic stratification as other ethnic groups in America. Well, I hope that over the next few days you will look very carefully at those facts and figures, and that you will also be careful in your interpretation and analysis. For clearly there are some bright signs and there are some dark signs. There are the bright signs that we see constantly. When we see Bill Cosby, the #1 television program in America, with a family that is of African American heritage, that is not one that has pathological tendencies, socially deviant behavior, but one that is perfectly normal, where folks love one another and people go to work, they are not on welfare, and they act like other human beings. There are bright signs in the society when we can read about a Reginald Lewis buying a billion-dollar corporation, Beatrice. It's a bright sign in America when we can look at the publishing empire of a John Johnson who started with $500 that he borrowed from his mother and built a multi-million-dollar publishing empire. It's a bright time for Black America when we can look not simply at people like Magic Johnson, Robert Parrish, Dr. J, well, he's retired now, and other famous athletes who are doing extremely well, and even occupying positions like Doug Williams that folks said were not for blacks to occupy, such as quarterbacking a professional football team. There are bright signs in America when I can come to Harvard and see members of the faculty who are of African American ancestry, and I can remember the time when there were hardly no such members present, and I can remember the time when in Ivy League America, famous black scholars could not find employment among the top universities despite their academic qualifications, and thus they were found primarily in the historically black colleges. It's a bright sign when we can see these symbols of positive change and the realization of the dream that Martin Luther King shared over 25 years ago with this nation on that hot August day in 1963. But at the same time that we rejoice at looking at the changing statistics, even in my own educational institution, Franklin and Marshall College, a small liberal arts college out in Pennsylvania Dutch country, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, When I was there were 5 of us in the whole student body. I recently returned. There are 75 of us in the whole student body. And I'm sure that is reflective of what is happening among most of the universities and colleges around America. And one can look at that and be fooled into believing that everything is all right and that the pulse and the health of black America is strong and growing stronger, and fail to understand that there's another side beside the bright side. There's a dark side. And let me share that with you. In 1968, after the riots, there was a report issued by the Kerner Commission. Some of you who are here are old enough to remember it. It was after what they called the riots, or some of us said the revolts, in urban America. And there was a need to analyze what were the problems that caused this outbreak of violence in places like Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Detroit. And so, as we normally do, we appointed a blue ribbon panel, and we asked them to look and study the problem and come forth and tell us what it was that was wrong. Well, what they said was that we have 2 Americas, one white, one black. One with opportunity and one with very little opportunity. Some of you perhaps have read it. If you have not, I would urge the black students of this institution, others who have come here to this conference, to go back and read it, because it had some statistics that are quite revealing. Those statistics were that black adult unemployment then was more than twice what white adult unemployment was at the time. And they said that this was an inequality that could not be tolerated in America, and that if we didn't do something about it, it would rip this nation apart. And there was a gathering storm. It also looked at black family income, and it pointed out that median black family income was less than half of what median white family income was. I believe, if my memory is correct, it was about 59%. And so they looked at another statistic, infant mortality, and they found that infant mortality in the black community was almost twice that, in fact, a little over that of what was in the white community. And they said these signs are dangerous. The reason I raise that to you tonight as you begin this conference is because if we are to move forward into the future and deal with the present, we must understand from whence we have come and understand the road over which we have trod and understand what the past was. And the reason I bring it to you, because if you look at the statistics gathered today by the United States Census Bureau, or if you look at the Department of Labor, or if you look at the status of black America by the National Urban League, you will find that in all 3 of those categories, the facts have actually gotten worse. Black adult unemployment is actually higher now than it was in 1968 in comparison to white adult unemployment. Infant mortality among blacks has actually increased in 20 years rather than decreased. In fact, Marion Wright Edelman will give you all of the statistics from the Children's Defense Fund to show you that in many of our urban communities, just a few steps away from the affluence of the citadels of commerce and higher learning, that you will find infant mortality rates that approach 3rd world countries and in some cases exceed them in the black community. And at the same time, if you look at black family median income, you will find that blacks in 1988 have slipped from where they were in 1968. And that is a fact from the United States Department of Labor and the Census Department. That is shattering for those of us who've seen the bright side, to know that there's a dark side. and that there have been some progress made. There has been some progress made in some areas, but yet in others there has not been some progress. I say that because I think there are three things we must recognize. One, that there is still a residue of bigotry, discrimination, and prejudice in this great land of ours. And it does none of us any good to avoid that question and act like when we passed the Public Accommodations Bill of 64, when we passed the Voting Rights Bill of 65, that everything was all right and everything was been put on even ground, a level playing field. The fact is that there still remains a residue of bigotry, discrimination, and prejudice that continues to be a barrier to the empowerment and the complete parity and equality of black people in this country. We see it constantly, various ways. We see it in the fact that although there are those who talk about equality of opportunity, that yet the good old boy network continues to govern decisions institutionally. And so thus, cities, when it comes time to decide who will do business with the city, somehow we just cannot find anyone to take advantage of contracting opportunities with our city or with our state. And that not only applies with government, but it also especially applies to the $3 trillion pond of the private sector, where we may have a vice president of personnel who happens to be of African American ancestry, but yet the company continues to do business exactly the way it did 20 or 30 years ago, and thus it cannot find contractors, subcontractors, those who provide from the African American community. Not only is it true in the private sector, but I also happen to sit on the board of about 4 academic institutions. And I know it's not a problem here at Harvard, but one thing that we have found is that we have found that many of those institutions with their multi-million-dollar budgets cannot find it possible to have an affirmative outreach program to contract with minority contractors and the disadvantaged. And even though they may have increased enrollment of minority students, and even though they may even have tenured black faculty, changing the fundamental structure of power and decision-making still has not really occurred. And that same problem exists in every aspect of our life. That is why I am so troubled tonight by the decision made by the Supreme Court with regard to the minority contracting in Richmond, Virginia. I am not troubled that the court said a hard quota of 30% was unconstitutional. We at the federal level, as a result of the leadership of Perrin J. Mitchell, who as a member of the Congressional Black Caucus helped to devise all the federal set-aside programs, we early learned that you needed to set goals because folks got upset when you set a hard number. And then you just had to enforce reaching for the goal. But what disturbs me about the majority opinion is, one, it said that amorphous claims of discrimination are not sufficient to have the remedy of an affirmative action program. That has broad-based implications beyond a hard quota of 30%. It means that the burden of proof now must be upon the victims of over 300 years of slavery, segregation, and bigotry and discrimination. That's going to be hard to find the smoking gun. And so thus that decision sends a signal that even the little progress that has been made institutionally toward opening up doorways of economic parity may be all right to close those doors as we enter the 1990s. I submit to you that we must continue the battle against the residue of bigotry, discrimination, and racism wherever it exists in our society. And thus, the reason we can't wait is because we cannot ever be free as long as bigotry, discrimination, and prejudice exist in this society. We may have brought down the superstructure of legalized bigotry and discrimination, but we must now get rid of the residue, and that is a lot tougher. Secondly, there's another area that we must be concerned about, and that is the area of economic justice. For you see, the battlefield has shifted. When Dick Hatcher was leading us in our civil rights struggle, we were trying to get in to the University of Alabama and the University of Mississippi. We were trying to move from the back of the bus to the front of the bus. We were trying to have the right to register at the Holiday Inn, the Hilton, or the Sheraton. But I submit to you that that is not the struggle in the 1990s or on into the next century for African Americans. The issue is not whether you can go to the University of Alabama or even to Harvard. It's whether you can pay the tuition. The issue is not where you sit on the bus or whether you even drive the bus, but whether you can amass the capital to buy the bus company. The issue is no longer whether you can check in to the Hilton, the Sheraton, or the Holiday Inn. It's whether you can check out. Those are the new issues of economic justice that we must address and face. And when you look at the economic pulse of black America, you can see that we are not in great shape. Yes, there has been a slight increase of the black middle class, but still there is a disproportionate number of black Americans who are living below the poverty line, over 33%. 1/3 of black America lives under the poverty line compared to only 10% of white America. So it seems to me that if we are to look at the future of black America, we must have a major war against poverty. There is not only a financial and a trade deficit out there, there is a social deficit out there that has been sorely neglected over the last 8 years. For in Washington, D.C., those who came wearing the clothes of fiscal conservatism turned out to be the biggest spenders in peacetime history. They took the national debt from less than $1 trillion to over $2.6 trillion. And at the same time that they borrowed and spent, contrary to popular belief, they also raised $454 billion of new taxes on the American taxpayer. So thus, if you have some simple arithmetic, it means that essentially they spent over $2 trillion. But at the same time, that investment was not in the area of dealing with the problems of the poor and the disadvantaged. Every budget I received from the former president called for cuts in education. And not just cuts in education, but cuts in the very programs that were the doorways of opportunity for the most disadvantaged students in our society, whether they be black or white, such as Pell Grants. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a difficult time understanding how you can be for equality of opportunity and yet you close the door that is providing that opportunity for people to lift themselves up, leave dependency on the state, and become productive citizens. That is a contradiction. But that is exactly what the last administration was so quite capable of doing, holding contradictions in tension and not letting it bother them at all. My friends, economic justice is where the fight will be. And that fight, I believe, will take place in several areas. One, it will take place in public policy. You see, what is the budget battle about? It's not simply about assets and liabilities. It's not simply about a dollar here, a dollar there. It's really a battle about who we are as a nation. As the good book says, and you will forgive me, where a person's treasure is, there will be their heart. Well, my friends, if you want to know where a nation or society stands, don't listen to the rhetoric of its leadership, no matter how pleasing and soothing it may be. But look where that society invests its money. Look at its budget. Back home at Bright Hope Baptist Church, when I counsel young ladies who are about to get married, and I say, dear, don't listen to what he says. Go check out how he spends his money. That will tell you more about him than anything he can say. And that is also true about our society. If we are to bring about greater opportunity in our society, and if we are to change those terrible statistics with regard to African Americans, we are going to have to recognize that part of the battlefield is in public policy. Now, I know you've been brainwashed by some from the radical right who want to tell you that government is the problem. In fact, if we could just get government off your back, you would be all right. And you know, that sounds pretty good. They say government wants to tax you and spend your money. But I always find it interesting how the very same people who espouse that ideology that sees government as some kind of serpent in the garden, an evil force, are the very same people who will come to see me and ask for my help for their tax preferences or for special contracts for the product that they make. And yet at the same time, they say social spending is somehow government on the people's backs. We need in the 1990s as African Americans to understand what is really at stake, because some of us are getting confused. The other day I ran into a brother who was saying, "Gray, you sound like one of those big spending liberals." I said, "Well, I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean. If liberalism means I'm concerned about elderly folk, I guess I am one. If liberalism means I'm concerned about children who are hungry in the midst of affluence, I guess I am one. If liberalism means I'm concerned about small farmers who need a hand, yeah, I guess if liberalism means that I think that education ought to be one of the top priorities of this nation and that we ought to make it available to anybody who has the desire and the ability, then yeah, I get, what are you? How do you define it? He said, I am a conservative. And I said, oh. I said, let me ask you, what do you do? And he said, well, he immediately told me what school he went to. I didn't ask him that, but he told me. And it was one of the right ones. And before I could repeat the question, he told me that he had gone to graduate school and he had his MBA. And I said, well, what do you do? And he said that he worked for a major corporation and that he was in the private sector, and what, you know, black folk got to understand is we got to get in the private sector, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, right on. I said, tell me, I said, you make a lot of money? He said, yes, I make a very good salary. I make a 6-figure salary. But not 7. 6. Let me, you know, is it under 200,000? Yes. But over 100? Yes. I said, you got a house? Oh, yes. He told me where he lived, and I said, do you have a summer place? Oh, yes, I have a summer. I said, tell me, what does your mama and daddy do? Well, mama was a school teacher. What did daddy do? Daddy worked for the city. I see. I said, you're conservative? He said, yeah. I said, could you please tell me what it is you got to conserve? I said, it seems to me the only thing you got is a bunch of bills. You don't own the house, And at that salary, you can't have much in the bank. And I know that you don't have no stock portfolio. So, I mean, what is it that you're trying to conserve? You know, I can understand Malcolm Forbes, my friend Lee Iacocca, who serves on the National Economic Commission. I can understand if they say they're conservative. They got something to conserve. I mean, if you're making $18 million a year, you like the status quo. I mean, that makes sense. So therefore, you want to conserve. Leave things just the way they are. I'm smoking. I'm doing all right. Right on. But some of our people are getting confused with these crazy labels that have no application to the reality that we as Americans face as a people. Now, I don't care if you want to vote for George Bush or Mike Dukakis. That's your privilege. But don't get confused about who you are, where you are, and what community you are a part of. Because just in one day's reorganization, that brother with that $150,000 salary can be out looking for a job, and he's probably in the upper middle class by his nails. And so, thus, any shift in the economic wind. My point is simply this. We need to understand that the battlefield is also one that involves public policy. If public policy is important to General Electric, General Dynamics, Westinghouse, it sure ought to be important to African Americans. Next, in terms of economic justice, we are going to have to increase our demand upon the private sector. Jesse Jackson has articulated for many years the theme of parity and enthusiasm of consumers from our community. We need to begin to say to those people whose products we buy, where are us? Do we have a representation in your contracting and everywhere else? Government is not the answer. It's part of the answer. Budgets I wrote were $1.2 trillion, but out there's a bigger pond of $3 or $4 trillion. And that is where we must enter if we are to reach parity. And so I submit to you that the black community also has to devise strategies to make sure that they have access to those larger waters and parity with regard to those larger waters. If folks want me to buy their products, but yet they cannot hire any advertising firms that are of African American heritage, and they want me to buy their products, I tell them no. Simple as that. Because as long as you continue to do that, no one will respect you. Finally, there's one other place that the future of black America must be determined, beside in the economic justice area, but also there's a place where it must be decided, where no Congress, no president, no corporation can help us. It is a place where we must help ourselves. It is the restoration of community. We talked about the bright side, the Bill Cosby, there's the Bruce Llewellyns, the number of blacks here at Harvard, over at the business school. But let me tell you, you know what the leading cause of death is among young black males between 18 and 24? It's not cancer, it's not heart disease, it's not AIDS, it's homicide. We are killing our next generation. In Washington, D.C., the figures are staggering. Every night, somebody murdered. In Philadelphia, in Detroit, in Cleveland, in Los Angeles, if you just add up the number of deaths of young black males that occur every week, every month across this country, you will understand we will never have a secure future if we continue to allow our brightest, our best to be killed. We will not make it as a people if we don't begin to do something ourselves about some of the problems that plague us. We must stop this foolishness of saying, I'm all right, I just snort a little bit. It's okay, I just smoke a little bit. Crack, pot, cocaine is the opiate that will keep African Americans from becoming what they ought to become. And my friends, only we can stop that. By beginning to have a restoration of values where we ostracize, we cast out from amongst us those who continue those practices that drag us down. You can't do your best at Harvard or any graduate school snorting coke. You can't do your best dealing with the problems that you will face in corporate America because the residue is there if you are running around popping pills. And let me tell you, Bill Gray or Dick Hatcher cannot do what we need to be doing in the political arena. If our minds are clouded by drugs, we have enough problems because we're black. And you have enough because you're black. And those problems are going to be there. And then if you cloud your mind with drugs and alcohol, you will never become the Adam Clayton Powells, the Martin Luther Kings, the Jesse Jacksons, the Harriet Tubmans, the Sojourner Truths of the next generation. My friends, when you examine our future, also examine the individual role that we must play in that future. For no one will save us from us but us. And ultimately, we must recognize that. Let me conclude by saying to you, the students who are here, I have found 3 things to be helpful in the struggle. 1, a commitment to excellence, to being the best that you can be in whatever it is you're going to do. Be the best. You're going to have to be the best. Because even when you are the best, even if you run twice as fast, you will just have to do that to stay in place. So therefore, when you see a black who has been successful in the private sector or in the public sector or anywhere else in entertainment or athletics, most of the time they had to run 3 or 4 times faster and be better. Doug Williams had to be 5 times better than anybody else. And so are you. Don't get mad because somebody applies a double standard. Understand that you were born who you are and that you are on the playing field, and because you're on that playing field, understand that's a fact of life. You ever see Dennis Johnson take time out, go over to the coach here in Boston down the Garden and say, Coach, every time I get the ball, there are 5 guys who are trying to take it from me? He doesn't do that. Why? Because Dennis knows at the moment he gets on the court, that's the name of the game. Well, the same thing must be true of us. We must develop a cadre of leaders who are not going to get mad and go on the sidelines and suck their militant thumbs and get mad because bigotry and prejudice has slapped them in the face, but they will get angry enough and charged up that they will run faster, jump higher, and shoot straighter than anybody else. That's what I'm talking about. Excellence. Secondly, in order to achieve that excellence, it's not going to come by osmosis or just lying around. It comes by sacrifice. It comes by sacrifice. I remember when I went to Franklin and Marshall, I came from a high school, inner city high school, Gratz High School. I don't know if anybody from Philadelphia here, but that high school, I hear some hands. That high school was 90% black, and it was called the ghetto school. All rats went to Gratz. And I remember, I thought I was bad. I was number 4 in my high school class of 369. I was the only 4-letter athlete in the class. I was editor of the yearbook, vice president, student body. I went to Franklin and Marshall, where these folk were from Exeter, Eton, from the suburban schools, and got in that classroom and suddenly found out that they had read and studied stuff that I'd never heard about. I had 2 choices. Either flunk out or go back and learn what I should have learned in order to compete. It took a while, but I suddenly realized that if I was to compete, I couldn't boogie. I couldn't go out as often as I wanted to go out. And so therefore, I had to spend 5 hours to get what some of them got in 2 hours. My friends, that's what I'm talking about. If black Americans are to make it, we must have a generation that is prepared to sacrifice. Sacrifice. And sacrifice not only for themselves, but sacrifice for their community. What troubles me today is I see many young people in places where their forefathers and foremothers could not have been. And yet, they don't even understand how they got there. I see folk who think I deserve to be here and don't understand that somebody died, somebody bled, somebody washed somebody else's clothes and cleaned up after somebody else in order for them to be in Harvard or Radcliffe or Boston U or Boston College or the University of Pennsylvania. And therefore, they think the world owes them something. And if all I do is get my MBA and my BA and become a lawyer with my degree from Harvard, everybody's going to be looking after me and I'll be all right. Well, I got some news for you. If that's all you do, your name is swine. You will be a traitor to your people. You will be a traitor to your heritage and to all of those who've gone before. But if, on the other hand, you learn as much as you can, you earn as much as you can as much as you can, and then you get off your can and give as much as you can, then you will be called blessed. Finally, one last thing that I have found that is necessary, that we will need for a strong future, and that is faith. Faith in ourselves and faith in who we are as a people. Don't ever let anybody tell you that you can't do something. Don't ever let the spirit of no, I can't overcome the spirit of yes, I can. Always believe that you are able to do anything. And you know, some folks down in Washington say, Bill Gray's awfully arrogant. Other people, they call it confidence. But you know, I grew up in a family and in a tradition that taught me that I was the descendant, not just of slaves, but of kings. I grew up in a family that told me that I was the great grandson of the kings and queens of Ghana, Songhay, and Mali. And long before there was an Oxford or Cambridge, there was a University of Geneva. Long before there was a Sorbonne or a Harvard Medical School, Hippocrates was going to Africa to learn the healing arts. Long before anybody was organizing government and commerce there in Africa, my forefathers had cities with commerce and sophisticated political organization. And guess what? Pharaoh was not Yul Brynner. Keep faith in yourself and who you are, because the road will be rocky, but I assure you that with faith, with excellence and sacrifice, you will make it, because we always have made it through the Middle Passage, through the seasoning plantations of the Lesser and the Greater Antilles, through the breeding plantations of Virginia, through being sold down the river to the Delta. Yes, we have made it through the night riders. And let me tell you, for those who think we will not be here in the 21st century, we will be here, and we will be here strongly. Because as one black mother said to her son, words that have carried me during the dark midnights, words that I hope you will remember even as you learn in this great historic institution, words that symbolize whether or not we have a future depends on you. That mother said, well, son, life for me ain't been no crystal stairs. It's had tacks, splinters, boards bare, places where there ain't been no carpet, but all's the time I's been a-climbing, reaching landings, turning corners, and going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So, son, daughter, don't you quit 'cause you find them there stairs kind of hard, for life for me ain't been no crystal stairs, and I's are still climbing. Students of Harvard, Radcliffe, participants in this conference, be proud of who you are, but remember the challenge. Climb, reach the new landings, turn the corners, and for God's sake, go in the dark where there ain't been no light. Thank you. Thank you. Let me say, as a Baptist preacher, as usual, I've gone a little longer than I expected. And so what I'm going to do, if that is the normal procedure, David, I'm going to stand right here and try to take about 10, 15 minutes of quick questions before running to catch the 8:20 flight. So, who wants to start off? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing fine.
Good. Congressman Gray, you made reference at the beginning of your remarks, which I think all of us appreciated, to the brighter side of the African American experience. And you made a reference to the numbers of black faculty in Ivy League institutions. Mm-hmm. And I think that that in all deference to you, mm-hmm. I think that that's not the brighter side of the African American experience. Mm-hmm. And with all respect to President Bach and the efforts of Dean Allison, here at the Kennedy School we have but one black faculty member, and I don't believe that his ideological persuasion is in keeping with that of the black leadership or intelligentsia in this country. I think, no. And I think that if you look at the numbers of us in this room, you know, we seem impressive. But if you spread us out among a student body of 10,000, we are dots here and there.
What is the question? I just want to
My question is that I don't have a question. I have a comment.
Okay. Well, thank you.
You smoked me out. Yeah. But I think that it's harmful for us not to deal with the realities. And the realities are that you made a reference to public policy. Those who are studying poverty here at this institution are not those who share the legacy of slavery. They are others. And I think that that's something we have to deal with. Right. I agree that public policy is important.
Let me quickly respond so that others may ask questions. I really have got only 10 minutes of questions, and I would prefer you make a question. One, if I gave you the impression that I am implying that at Harvard or University of Pennsylvania or any place else there is a parity and perfect equality, I guess I did not make myself clear. I was saying there's a bright side to the fact that there are blacks who are now on faculties and in places of high level where they weren't 20 years ago or 30 years ago. However, I think I pointed to the dark side, and in pointing to the dark side, I mentioned the fact that many of our academic institutions really had not done significantly enough. I don't know the story here at Harvard. I'm not going to get into that, but I would imagine it's like many of the colleges in my own district. Okay? And I would just simply say to you that, one, we still have a long way to go. That was the point of my comments. And so when we talk about the future of America, we see symbols of success, the dots, as you put it, and often people don't see the masses. So please forgive me if you thought I was implying that everything is perfect here at this great institution. I assure you that I was not. I was trying to say there has been change. There's still a long way to go, and that is at every level in the United States of America. There's another question.
She kind of mentioned the people studying public policy and studying poverty were not African Americans, and I plead guilty. I'm one of them. Do you have anything to say?
Don't feel guilty about that at all. I'm not ashamed that you are studying poverty and how to deal with the problems of the underclass, because truth does not come in one-color packages. Mm-hmm. It comes in living color, technicolor, and as Jesse would say, the rainbow. And so it is not a question of what color you are. It is a question of what is the direction of your heart and your values and commitments. So if you're studying social science and how to deal with poverty, right on. We need all the experts that we can. Let me go to this gentleman right over here. And I don't want you to feel guilty.
I'm not going to try to be articulate, but I guess at the first woman's point, I don't know about anyone's ideological standpoints or any of those concerns, but I was listening to your speech and you said like the goals of like the black community, like economic parity and the equalized socioeconomic stratification, and I want to make reference to like telling a story. Like Toni Morrison talks about like she talks about restoring the role of the community and the black village. And she says that what's important is that we remember the good things about our history, about like the African American heritage, and that we tell the story. I think that what the woman's point is not that not to undermine our goals of economic parity, but that in telling the story, our most important goal, our most primary goal is Derek Bach's subtle like allusion to like education, and that it's all of our goals as like blacks who are successful, who have been educated, to like tell the story to those who haven't heard it yet. And
what is the question?
My question is that do you agree with that then?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand, but if you say to me, Bill, is education the simple solution to the problems of black people?
I don't see it as, sir, I'm sorry, I don't see it as a simple solution. I'm saying that it's very important, those economic goals. But I'm saying that before those economic goals can be attained, there's like a catalyst that has to initially be attained, and that catalyst is education. That catalyst, before we can achieve economic parity, before we can achieve all those goals.
Education, well, that's what I was talking about when I was talking about excellence. I thought you understood that I was trying to tell you to get straight A's, a 4.0, baby. That's what I was trying to tell you when I was talking about my experience in that white college that I went to. I talked about how, I was there competing in my freshman class with folks who've been to Eton and Exeter, the bad private schools, Simon Gratz, we didn't read Moby Dick. I won't tell you what I thought when I heard the professor say that. I came from a good home. And I thought I had gone away to school and the devil had taken over. Man, talking about. But at where I went to school, that community, the tribal village, Tony, I know Tony, whatever you want to call it. That's what I'm talking about when I say restore our community. I didn't know that. What I had to do was, if I wanted to compete with those folks, I had to go back and do a senior year, junior year of high school work that they had already done to compete. So I would just simply say to you, yes, education is absolutely important. But I want to say something that is going to be strange to hear somebody who holds a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degree, and 90% of my PhD. I went crazy, ran for Congress, and got elected. Dick Hatcher came and got me elected to Congress in Philadelphia. And the only thing I had to do was write my dissertation. But I'm going to tell you something. Education alone is not the solution. It is a prerequisite, and if all you want to do is go out and make money, then yeah, you got to have a degree. You get yourself education. But I'm going to tell you a fact. In 1990, a black with a college degree still is expected only to have the average income of a white with a high school diploma. And if you carried on up to a master's degree, black with a postgraduate degree is still, on average, will make what a white with a bachelor's degree will make. So, education is important. It is a must. We must have a talented 10, as W.E.B. Du Bois. You here have that opportunity to be it. But don't get hung up on your education that somehow it makes you different from the brother down in North Philadelphia. You will find out with your Harvard diploma that many people are still going to call you. Do you understand that? Because racism does not respect education. Okay? Racism is much deeper than that. So I would just simply say to you, yes, when I was talking about excellence, that's what I didn't use the code. Same degree, and you can have exactly the same average. All right? And if you don't understand that, then you are in deep trouble. Yes, sir.
Congressman
Yes,
Gray, you expressed some concern about the minority contract ruling of the Supreme Court. I would like to know whether your Democratic caucus is planning anything to change that. I understand you have some influence, or correct me if I'm wrong. Are you planning to do anything about it?
At this particular point, it is very doubtful that the Congress will be able to overturn that decision. Why? Because Congress already has taken a position that you cannot have a hard goal of 10%, 30%. When we wrote in the Congressional Black Caucus the minority set-aside programs, if you read the language, it says a goal of 10%. It's a goal, not it must be 10%. And thus, that has been upheld in the federal courts. And we have several set-aside programs that are working extremely well. In fact, most of them have exceeded the goal of 10%. For instance, the Gray Amendment on USAID, the Agency for International Development, that's all the foreign assistance programs. One day I got the bright idea because a famous university came to me out of my district and said they wanted to do a contract in Liberia. And I said, let me investigate. And you know what? I found out that in that particular year, the State Department had given $110 million worth of contracts to colleges and universities in America, but not one to a black college. I looked a little further, and I saw that they'd given $180 million in contracts to what we call private voluntary organizations that, deliver food aid, like in Ethiopia, etc., World Relief, Catholic Charities. And I looked, and I never saw one. I didn't see the AME Church that's had missions in Africa going back almost 200 years. Okay? I didn't see Africare, C. Payne Lucas. I didn't see any black private volunteer organizations. And then I looked at the contracts, and you know what? I found the same thing. So we instituted this set-aside. Sure enough, they told me, we can't do this. We can't find folks to do it. Well, you know what? 3 years later, after they'd given out $300 million of contracts to minority businesses, they exceeded the 10% goal and hit 17% and walked around saying, look what we done. I don't see the Black Caucus being able to correct it. Why? Because the mood in Congress is not such that you're going to get a vote in the House and the Senate. In fact, one of the tragic things of the last 8 years has been the lack of moral leadership on the question of race relations in this country. And it was very tragic to see the outgoing president, as he departed, to trash black leadership once again by talking about their self-serving ways with regard to raising the race question. And I think that, as some of us warned back in 1980, Mr. Reagan has changed the court. And I think you're seeing the beginning. And I do not see Congress reversing the Richmond decision because, as I said before, Congress has taken a position that hard quotas are unconstitutional. But what I'm concerned about is not that. I'm concerned about the implication that you must prove discrimination before you can have a class action, all right? And that if you can't prove it, then all of these programs could be suspect. And if they didn't create a record of proof before the program was instituted. And so, as some of us said back then, when a certain gentleman won the presidency, you're talking about people who are going to be sitting there interpreting the law for the next decade. I'll take one last question, then I will have to run.
The problems that you alluded to, or that you said were for the problems of the black community, are also reflected in the Latino community in the United States. And lately there's a lot been written about the conflict.
28% of that community lives in poverty.
And recently a lot of stuff has been written about conflicts between the black community and the Latino community, especially in Chicago and in Los Angeles recently with the redistricting problem out there. What do you see the future of our relationships, of our relationship?
Well, I think that there's going to be some natural competition in certain areas. That's normal. But at the same time, I mean, like what you see happening in Miami, which is most unfortunate, you're going to see some ethnic friction as the latest new arrivals are pushing those who have historically been there. You also see some friction in some other places like Southern California and in the Southwest and Texas. But I have always said there is more in common between the two communities than there are differences. And what we must do is work together on a common agenda, for many of the same barriers that Latinos face are the same barriers that African Americans face. And yes, there will be times when we will disagree. But we should understand that and not see that as some rift that we can never heal. I think the question of discrimination and bigotry, it is not only directed at Afro-Americans, it's also directed at Latinos. That's a common cause. Affirmative action programs, minority business set-aside programs, the Black Caucus, the way we write them, it also applies to the Latino community, such as the AID amendment that I told you that I wrote. They have been big recipients because they were locked out of doing contracting with the federal government overseas. I think that that is good, but at the same time, there are going to be some places where there will be some natural tensions, where there will be differences. But I think that there's much more in common than there are differences. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity.